Hello, everybody, and welcome to the combination of a Leisure World Democratic Club and District 19 Democratic Club meeting. It's really going to be interesting tonight. We've got a town hall with all of our Annapolis representatives here, Senator Kramer and delegates Crutchfield and Cullison and Stewart. And so it promises to be a really interesting evening. At the end of the evening, which is scheduled to stop at 8 o'clock, the Democratic Club members, I'm going to ask you to stay on the Zoom call because we have elections that we have to do at 8 o'clock. And if we don't get them done tonight, then God, you're stuck with me for another month. Anyway, I'm Roger Blacklow. I am the president of the Democratic Club of Leisure World. And at least for tonight, I still am. And it's great to have so many people. We had over 100 people sign up for this particular event. And I'm going to turn it over to my esteemed colleague in District 19. Stephen, can you take over? And before you do, let me introduce some of the, and I'm probably going to miss somebody, but some of the special guests that we have that are on the call tonight. We have Councilman Evan Glass. We have Sydney Katz, who represents Leisure World in my District 4 right here. Shebra Evans, who is from the Board of Education, and many of you have known her for several years. Doug Gansler, who's the former state's attorney and attorney general, is on. And we're lucky we have Karen Hendricks from Senator Van Hollen's office, who we've seen several times before on various events. So I will turn it over to my counterpart, Stephen.
Hello, everyone. My name is Stephen Seneme. I'm the president of the District 19 Democratic Club, and this is Dipper, the first dog of the District 19 Democratic Club. He's very tired. So anyway, what we do in the D19 Club is we have meetings typically every month, and pretty much from now until the election, what we're going to do for the in a lot of those meetings is meet a lot of our primary candidates. Next meeting is going to be on May 26th. And that'll be with gubernatorial candidate Ashwani Jain. And then the two meetings after that will be for the two non-incumbent at-large candidates who've announced, Brandy Brooks and Kristen Mink, who just announced yesterday, I believe. And we have a lot of fun, or at least we did before the pandemic. Once everyone gets the vax, and we're gonna start hosting our outdoor events again. The last event we held was the D19 picnic, which I hope by the time August comes around, I hope we'll be able to have that again. Wow, it's been so long. I don't forget the park it was at, but I forget the name of the park it was at. It had Forest something Park in it. But anyway, we'll probably have it at a different park this go around anyway. So if you're interested in the club, please send me a direct message here or email me. My email is Stephen with a V, Seneme, CENNAME @gmail.com. We have one opening on our board currently right now. I'm the president. Our vice president is Deirdre Gallagher. We are both failed MCDCC candidates. Bit of trivia about us. And our membership director is Suzanne Backtash, who's probably on the call somewhere, I assume. And we have an opening for secretary. So if you're interested, I would like to bring some diversity to the board. Also, all three of the board members right now are currently from the north part of the district. So if you're in the south part of the district, Aspen Hill, Four Corners, it'd be great to have you on the board as well. So with that, do I hand it over to Roger, or do I start again, or do I hand it to Senator Kramer? Oh yes, I
Senator
remember now.
Kramer.
Hi, so I would like to introduce our wonderful state senator and fellow Durwood, well, formerly fellow Durwood resident. I just recently moved to the
Yeah, I'm
south part of
glad you
Gaithersburg.
clarified that because I didn't. So
Oh, yeah. I'm the one who moved slightly north, but I'm still just early in D19. So hopefully they keep that in consideration when they draw those districts coming up. So I would like to introduce our wonderful Senator Ben Kramer.
thank you for that, Steve, and good evening to everyone. My thanks to the Montgomery County Democratic Central Committee for hosting the town hall. They have been wonderful in working with all of our delegations throughout the county. Since the pandemic began and we started doing these meetings by Zoom, and my thanks to our wonderful friends at the Leisure World Democratic Club, as well as the District 19 Democratic Club. Roger has been doing a phenomenal job as president of the Leisure World Democratic Club, and Steve has done equally well with the District 19 Democratic Club. So my thanks to them for all their hard work and efforts for the Democratic Party. And I'm thinking that perhaps soon we will be having these meetings in person again. In the last 114 days, 250 million shots in arms.
Yeah.
What a blessing that is. And that has happened because we had a change in administrations, and we went from denial and refusal to accept the fact that we were in a pandemic to an administration that was 100% committed to saving lives in our country. And our president has come through on that. Our Democratic Senate and Congress have come through on that. And we are finally seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. I will also say that having our leadership on Capitol Hill in the Democratic Party paid huge dividends for us in the state legislature this year. Coming into session, we really didn't know what our financial situation was going to be, and it truly looked bleak when we first came into Annapolis this year. And one of the first things that your Democrats in the legislature did was to pass a $1 billion relief package in the very first few weeks of the legislative session that put money directly into the bank accounts of our low-income families, direct checks to people qualifying for the earned income tax credit, significant support for small business, utility assistance for those who were behind on their utilities. And the work was quick and efficient. And then we were fortunate, again, because of the new leadership on Capitol Hill, that Maryland received $24 billion in direct aid to residents here in the state, as well as almost that amount for education in the state, for our business assets, and another $4 billion for our schools. So we ended up going in thinking we were going to have a very difficult time making ends meet and addressing the huge needs that the pandemic created. But with the help of our partners at the federal level, we have been able to provide some significant assistance. Now, going into the session, we had no idea what it was going to be like. Normally, the hallways of the State House and the House Office Building, the Senate Office Building, normally those hallways are bustling with people who are there to meet with legislators. lobbyists who jump on us the moment we walk out of our offices and track us all the way onto either the floor of the chambers or into our committees. This year, it was desolate. No one was allowed on the campus, and there was pretty much just tumbleweed blowing through the hallways. And while I quite frankly didn't miss the lobbyists, it was unusual and disappointing not to be able to interact with our friends and our constituents that like to come up and meet with us in Annapolis. There was a lot of speculation that we were not going to last very long by virtue of the virus taking hold. There were betting pools as to how long we would last. I have to admit that after week 3, I was out $20, but pleasantly surprised. And we made the entire 90-day session. And I very proudly say we did some really, really good work this session. And each of my District 19 colleagues is going to discuss a lot of that good work that we accomplished. I'll start with Delegate Bonnie Cullison, who is the senior member of our House delegation. And Bonnie is on the Health and Government Operations Committee, where she serves as a subcommittee chair. And her voice on that committee is extremely important. And Bonnie had worked on some good legislation that she got passed this session. And she will share that work with you. Bonnie will turn it over to Delegate Charlotte Crutchfield. Charlotte out of the gate had a huge victory this session because a bill that she championed and passed last year to create the very first and only women's pre-release center in the state had been vetoed by Governor Hogan last year. And one of the first things that our legislature did was to override Governor Hogan's veto. And I'll let her discuss her work on that. It was, a lot of time and effort, and she'll discuss the other issues that came into the House Judiciary Committee, where Charlotte also serves as a subcommittee chair. And then Charlotte will turn it over to Delegate Vaughn Stewart, who had a very good year as well. He serves on the Environment and Transportation Committee. And there was a lot of work that came through that committee, and some very good work that had Delegate Stewart's signature on it, as he was the lead sponsor. And I know he'll be proud to discuss that. And then I'll come back in bat cleanup and discuss some of the things that happened in the Senate Finance Committee and some of the work that I personally took on. So with that, Delegate Cullison.
Thank you very much, Senator. I appreciate this. And I think the first thing I want to say is I am so grateful for the opportunity to work with this team that represents you in Annapolis. It's a very thoughtful and team who takes the work very seriously, and we, coordinate and complement each other well. So thank you. I am grateful for this opportunity. So this session was different from any of my previous 10 sessions. The previous 10 sessions, I could pretty much predict, the highs and low energy points during the session. I can only describe the 2021 session as a 90-day sprint. I mean, we started on day 2, hearing bills, and we didn't stop until April 13th. And I, like the senator, was grateful that we made it through the entire day, the entire session. The only thing I regret is that sprint didn't really use up any calories because I was doing a lot of sitting. So, I didn't benefit physically from the sprint nature of the session this year. It was an incredible session in terms of legislation. And some very significant policies were passed in this session. And I want to speak to, as the senator said, to a couple of the health, and I do want to speak a little bit to the government operations part. I don't usually do that, but there were a couple of bills that of significance in the government operations part that we dealt with in my committee. There were two very big bills that I referenced, I think, the last time we spoke in a town hall in October, that were going to be highlighted in this session, that took a lot of my insurance and pharmaceutical subcommittee time, and really working collaboratively with some very different perspectives to come to a product that ultimately everybody could sign on to. And the first was about telehealth, because we all sort of, telehealth existed before the pandemic, but it had, and there were some regulations about it, but it was, used by providers at their will, at their wishes, when it was convenient, and those who were interested in using technology more. With the pandemic, it became a primary, for many of us, a primary modality of service. And so out of that, that experience came a lot of questions. And there became questions about when is it the right time to use telehealth? How should it be reimbursed? Who should be able to use it? What does it mean? How do you actually define telehealth? And so the ultimate bill doesn't answer those questions, but says we're going to find the answer in the next 2 years by keeping everything that was existing during the pandemic in place, which meant things like insurance companies are going to continue to reimburse at the level that they were reimbursing during the pandemic, which was not true before. It means that that behavioral health can be administered through telehealth. It means that a telephone call can be a telehealth visit as appropriate. So we're going to study telehealth over the next 2 years to get the information that we're going to need to make the right policies around telehealth. One of the interesting things that I learned during this discussion on this bill was there are opportunities to use telehealth in ways that are ultimately have the potential to save money in insurance. So for example, there are now products, particularly if you have Care First, you've been exposed to one already, that says, if you would like to have to use a telehealth program for like a triage, then you can sign up for the program. You can say, you know what, I've got a mark on my face. I really want to know whether or not I should go to the doctor or not. And Care First now is a program where you can sign up, you can use a video tele visit and ask the question, where should I go? Should I go to a primary care? Should I go to an urgent care? Should I go to a hospital? Should I go to the pharmacist and get a cream? So again, that has the potential for saving significant dollars in healthcare premiums. And we're going to know a lot about telehealth at the end of this study. So I was pretty proud that we were able to get everybody on the same page on that bill. The other bill that we worked very diligently on, and while people agreed to the final product, it's probably, it wasn't what either side really wanted. And this bill is the medical debt protection bill. What the bill came in with was really just trying to limit what hospitals could do or providers could do to collect on medical debt. What we discovered in the work on the bill was that, hospitals were charging people who qualified for free care because they hadn't done due diligence around whether or not they were eligible. And some of that was the infrastructure that wasn't set up. This bill speaks to that lack of infrastructure and how they are now required to set it up, and how they will make sure that people who qualify for free care do indeed get free care. It also requires the hospitals to refund folks who were charged erroneously because they were eligible for free care. And something that it also says, and relates specifically to our experience during the pandemic, if you become eligible for free care within 180 days after your hospital stay, then you're eligible for free care, and that debt is resolved. So, the bill made a lot of progress. It also prevents a couple of things that hospitals were doing, like putting liens on primary residents and actually arresting people for medical debt. And so those will all be prevented. The bill also allows for income-based repayment plans, not just for those with low income, but for any income. So there'll be a protocol by which a hospital will decide, and not decide, but work with the patient to determine a workable, reasonable repayment plan. So we are gonna work with this bill for the next 2 years and make sure that we've got all the things we need in place to protect consumers, and then see if we need to make any changes. With respect to COVID-19, we did a couple of things that I think are worth mentioning, and that's that we want to develop a real plan. One of the failings that we saw going into the pandemic was there was no real plan at the federal level, and the plan at the state level had some holes in it in terms of how did we accomplish testing, how did we accomplish getting the vaccines out, how did we do contact tracing. So this bill will help us to transition out of the catastrophic health emergency, hopefully, and also lay the groundwork in the event that this happens again. So it's a pretty major bill. And if you had anyone who became ill or was living in a nursing home during the pandemic, you experienced the frustration of not being able to visit your loved one. And that was a huge issue and across the state. And so we passed a bill that basically said we're going to work within the state and with respect to federal guidelines, but to be more flexible around the visitation of families and allowing family members to actually become, designated caregivers within the nursing home setting. So that we won't have this situation again where our loved ones are alone in the nursing homes during these very difficult times. So we passed a number of bills that have to do with health occupations. Many of them have to do with national compacts. So what that means is that for like occupational therapists and physical therapists and psychologists, they can now link themselves to a national network, and it will create more positions for those services for Marylanders, because anyone in Maryland can access that network. In terms of the government operations part of our work, we repealed the State Song of Maryland. The State Song of Maryland was the lyrics of the state song. The music was Christmas Tree, if you know, but the lyrics, if you studied the lyrics, it was really a Confederate song that was written that in honor of the Confederacy, and completely against the work that our president at that time, Abraham Lincoln, was doing, called him a despot, tyrant. And so it just didn't match the spirit of Maryland. It's been a bill that's been in the legislature for many years. We finally repealed it. It may be replaced down the line, but this bill did not. And then the other bill that we passed that I think has significant meaning is one that will, that during a state of emergency requires more oversight of the purchase of urgent purchases. You all remember about when the governor announced that we had all of those testing kits for COVID? Well, what was not true was you had only part of the testing kit. So a lot of that money went wasted. And a lot of those tests went wasted because the procurement process was not what it should have been. So this bill puts into place a set of protocols and oversight by the Legislative Policy Committee that will make sure that any of those urgent procurements are done with the same kinds of oversight and authorization that we have under normal procurement processes, although it will be a much shorter process and with a higher level committee. On a personal note, so those are bills that, you know, I worked on as a member of the committee. There are two bills that I'm really proud of personally, and one was that the Thomas Raskin mental health bill. And what that bill did, and I worked with Senator Zucker from District 14, is establish a program where someone who's struggling with mental health issues can opt into a program to get regular calls, regular check-in calls from a professional to say, how are you doing today? Do you need some support? Do you need some, you know, can we help you in any way? And this bill was driven by the fact that, you know, first of all, we were as a district and as a state, we were devastated by the suicide of Senator Raskin's, Congressman Raskin's son, and also a member of our education community son at the state level also committed suicide. So this is a way that we're trying to be proactive in preventing that. And then the second bill was, as many of you know, I've been very committed to expanding the number of school-based health centers in the state and passed a number of bills that build that foundation. This bill that I was able to pass this year it transfers the clinical operations of school-based health centers from the Department of Education to the Department of Health. That's where the expertise lies around health issues. So we were able to make that transition. And I'm going to be working closely with the director of the Division of Maternal and Child Health in the Maryland Department of Health to make sure that we have the support that we need to expand at, the number of school-based health centers and the access to it. So thank you again for this time. Thank you to the Leisure World Democratic Club and the D19 Democratic Club. And I'm going to turn it over now to Delegate Charlotte Crutchfield.
Thank you, Delegate Cullison. And you know, before I get started, I just want to acknowledge District 19's team that really is working hard for you in the Maryland General Assembly. I mean, we really work together well, support each other on legislation. And I just want to say to each of you, Senator Kramer, Delegate Cullison, Delegate Stewart, how much I appreciate working with you, and just look forward to us continuing to do that. So with that said, I'm Delegate Charlotte Crutchfield, and I serve on the Judiciary Committee. And that committee really considers legislation around the court system, legal profession, criminal law, procedure, process, family law, juvenile law, etc. I am also a subcommittee chair, and actually it's a combined subcommittee of family law and juvenile law. I also serve on the executive board of the Legislative Black Caucus of Maryland, and we have 60 members. We are one of the largest Black caucuses in the United States, and we serve to, again, just bring in the special interests of Black residents in Maryland. I'd like to focus now a little bit more on what the Judiciary Committee did this session. I want to describe it probably in one word, and that is epic. We just listened. I mean, we were led by our speaker, who immediately responded to everything that was happening outside, you know, in the world as we know it, regarding all the deaths, everything that was going on with the police, and created a work group. And out of that work group came legislation, again, that is pushing Maryland in the forefront, where involving police accountability and transparency. The legislation is made up of several different bills. And I'm just going to talk briefly about 3 of those bills. The first bill is what's known as HB 670. And in that bill, it describes for you the details of repealing the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights, which is a 40-year-old document that gave law enforcement officers special rights when they were being disciplined. That has now been repealed and replaced by a structure that includes civilian review boards and provides much more civilian ability to be involved with the process. It also includes in it a couple of things. For example, it deals with the fact that police officers must display their ID when they're coming in contact with others, especially in a stop. The legislation will, again, just push us to the forefront. The other legislation I want to talk to you just really briefly about is SB 71. And that is a legislation that requires body-worn cameras in the state of Maryland for police enforcement organizations. Again, this, however, will not be in place for everybody until 2025. The other major part of this legislation is that we now will have something that is a statewide use of force standard. In other words, police officers will now have to follow specifically guidelines when they're using use of force. And it can only be it can only be proportionate and necessary when they're using it, which is a big difference because before it was reasonable, whenever they thought it was reasonable to use of force. So that's another big standard that happened in that particular bill. The other bill, which is SB 178, deals with the records involved in trying to just get information whenever a police officer is in a situation where they have, where there's a disciplinary action involved. And so now residents and others who are involved in a situation may be able to get more information regarding that police officer's past involvements. And this again is just paramount because before people could not get information on what happened in a particular police officer situation dealing with any disciplinary actions regarding that police officer. The other thing that's important about this legislation is that it will also now create a standard for no-knock warrants. The no-knock warrants will now have to be given between the hours of 8 and 7 a.m. And there's special requirements around when a no-knock warrant can be issued by a court. So all of those things are really critical. And again, this just really pushes us to the forefront in police reform. And I'm hearing that there are other states looking at it and really wanting to take this as a guide. And I think we've done great work here. And again, to thank the Judiciary Committee for doing all of that. The other thing I'd like to just point out is that there's a couple of other things that you may want to know about that are going to be things to just think about as well. One of the things is that the governor will no longer be involved in the parole process. In other words, there is now a bill that eliminates the role of the governor in the parole process for individuals serving a term of life imprisonment, which is wonderful because that's been a problem in that we haven't had many people that are able to go through the parole commission. So that's great legislation. Another piece of legislation is dealing with the compensation of individuals who have been erroneously convicted, sentenced, and confined. And it's called the Walter Lomax Act. It actually provides compensation to those individuals with specific guidelines on that compensation, because that's been another issue. And so it requires that to go through the Board of Public Services for that particular pay compensation. Then one final thing I'd like to talk about from the committee is SB 494, which is the Juveniles Convicted as Adults Sentencing Limitations and Reduction, which is known also as the Juvenile Restoration Act. It ends juvenile life sentences without parole, and that is really critical here. It will give people who have been convicted as minors an opportunity to have their sentences reconsidered. That is really big. I mean, we again, are doing really fantastic things in the state of Maryland. So I'm happy to be a part of that. The senator mentioned something that I'm really, truly excited about, and he's absolutely right. This piece of legislation, which dealt with the pre-release services for women, is something I have been working on for the last couple of years. And it was actually passed, and it was passed with the help of the senator, who did a couple of fast moves for me in the Senate to make sure that we got this bill through. It got back over to my side where it was voted on, and unfortunately the governor did veto it in 2020. So we came back 2021 strong, and we did override that veto. So women in the state of Maryland will now get the opportunity to have pre-release services. And in fact, we're going to get started on it next month with working with the Secretary of Corrections on that. So that's some really exciting news for women in Maryland. I introduced several other bills, and they were around, again, the juvenile system, because let me just say this, one of the things that I'm really concerned about is the fact that we have children as young as 7 who have come into the jurisdiction of the juvenile courts. And that's because we don't have a standard here in Maryland for juvenile justice, as far as the juvenile jurisdiction goes. And so one of the things I'm looking to do, and one of the things I actually did, was to introduce legislation to create a standard for the age that juveniles should be introduced into the juvenile justice arena. There was also a bill that I introduced to actually ban out-of-home placements for juveniles. And, again, it didn't make it through, but that's okay. We'll come back on it. So again, my focus, because I'm also the subcommittee chair, has been on the juvenile law area. And in particular, dealing with that, because our juvenile system just really needs an overhaul. And I would say that's probably one of the biggest disappointments for me this session, was that we weren't able to get across, much of the juvenile justice reform legislation. There was an omnibus bill that included those things I just mentioned and a few other things, but we just couldn't make it through. So I'm hoping that we can do that next session. One other disappointment, and this is not in actually the juvenile or in the Judiciary Committee, and that was actually that we weren't able to pass Juneteenth as a National Freedom Day. And I had hoped that that would be something to kind of bridge everybody, but unfortunately we weren't able to do that either. I think that it has been like I said before, when I started this, it has been an epic session with the type of legislation that we were able to pass this past session. I look forward to us being able to do much more. And most importantly, is because we're listening to you, our residents, and we're listening to other residents in Maryland, period, to find out what are the things that are most important to you. And we get it. I think that you have such a wonderful team, not only of District 19, but just of others working in the legislature to really make things possible and to really see what is going on in Maryland and how we can help to support and fix those things. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pass the the gavel on to Delegate Stewart and let him go ahead and speak.
Thank you very much, Delegate Crutchfield. It's great to join everyone this evening. I am indeed Delegate Vaughn Stewart, and I am getting really sick of this Zoom stuff. I'll be honest with you. It's great to see so many faces, so many familiar faces, but I cannot wait to actually see all of you in person really, really soon. Someone told me the other day that basically cicadas just sit in trees all day and scream. And there are certain parts of this pandemic, the more isolated parts of this pandemic, where I really empathize with the cicadas and wanted to just sort of find a nice place to sit myself and just scream. But I'm very glad that it's coming to an end. And on a more serious note, if you know anyone who's still having trouble securing a vaccine appointment, please don't hesitate to reach out to us, because we're doing well. Our numbers are getting better every day, but we really want to get to that herd immunity percentage. And so please let us know if anyone's still struggling with that. As everyone has already said, this was really quite a session. It was definitely the strangest session that probably any of us will ever have in many ways. COVID, of course, dominated our work, both in terms of the strict safety protocols and also our policy priorities. And, I think that we all realized that history would really judge how we responded to these trying times. And I think all four of us really recognize the number of folks across the state and across our district who really were ravaged, both in terms, financially and health-wise from the pandemic. And I think the General Assembly really delivered one of the most productive sessions in recent memory. A lot of this has already been covered, but it's kind of startling to even think that we managed to give families emergency relief. We fully funded our schools. We overhauled a broken unemployment system. We tackled police accountability. We showed a lot of empathy to our immigrant neighbors, and we made strides in the battle against climate change. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. And we did that in 90 days with all these protocols in place. And along the same lines as my teammate said, you should be proud that the District 19 team was collectively in the thick of every single one of these fights and these accomplishments. And through the four committees that we serve on, the teams, our legislative tentacles, if you will, reach nearly every issue. And I think, we're a diverse team in many ways, but we're homogenous in one really important way, which is that each of us leave it all out on the field each session. All four of us, I think, work so well together because we all appreciate how important it is for your voice to be heard in Annapolis. And the four of us literally exhaust ourselves every session to make that happen. I'm still personally recovering. So I definitely, agree with my colleagues' comments about how much of a pleasure it is to work with them and how productive we as a General Assembly were, but then more specifically, we as a team were this session. And I know that given that what we were able to pull off this session, given all the challenges and hurdles, I know that there's still room to do a lot more, the four of us and the General Assembly as a whole in future sessions. So I think I'll start with my bills, and then I'll kind of go into what my committee, which is the Environment and Transportation Committee, delved into. So I managed to pass 5 bills this session. All 5 of them are currently on the governor's desk. I think his deadline is next week for deciding whether or not he's going to sign them, let them pass without his signature, or veto. My proudest accomplishment this session, and what may go down as one of my proudest accomplishments maybe in my life, was the passage of HB 16, which is the Dignity Not Detention Act. And this is really a path-breaking bill. It makes Maryland the national leader on this issue, and it'll ban for-profit ICE detention centers in Maryland, and it'll phase out Maryland's 3 existing detention centers by 2022. And I mean, basically, the situation here is that ICE, which I consider a depraved federal agency, they pay private prison companies and they pay counties to hold and mistreat our neighbors. And so one example was there was a Rockville resident who was helping his uncle cut down a tree in his uncle's yard. And he was cited by the Department of Natural Resources for cutting down a tree without a tree cutting license. And before you know, ICE was called. The guy in Rockville was undocumented. And before you know it, he's headed up to Frederick and then spent 100 days in their ICE detention center being subjected to all sorts of extraordinarily cruel, depraved treatment, like, not having his medical needs met, having to sleep on the floor, not being given shoes, the list goes on and on. And so Maryland, I think, really and the General Assembly really sent a strong moral statement with this bill that we're better than ICE, and we're better than ICE's detention centers, and we're better than what has been going on in them. And so I was really proud to work with inspiring advocates and community leaders and my colleagues from across the state. Delegate Crutchfield also played a key role in her position on the Judiciary Committee. And we were able to essentially keep families together and say loud and clear that no one should be profiting off of human misery. No one should be profiting off of family separation. Now, I say all that, Governor Hogan will absolutely veto that bill next week. He is no friend to Maryland's immigrant community. He never has been, he never will be. He'll veto that bill next week, and we'll come back either maybe in a special session. I doubt we'll have one this year, but maybe in a special session this year, or at the very latest in January of 2022, and we will with pleasure override that veto, and I will have that day circled on my calendar. But that was a big win, I think, for the state of Maryland. It was a big win for me. It was a big win for the General Assembly, and we are now the national leader on that issue. And secondly, as everyone knows, especially in the aftermath of the insurrection that happened at the U.S. Capitol, feels like it was just yesterday, but now it's been a few months. White supremacy, anti-Semitism, hate crimes are all on the march in this country. And so I introduced a bill with Senator Shelley Heddleman of Baltimore County called the Educate Against Hate Act, which was HB 128. And it passed, it's on the governor's desk, hopefully he'll sign that one. And it will create an anti-bias educational curriculum that can be required as part of a hate crime offender's sentence. So that's basically a fancy way of saying this would allow a judge to sentence a hate crime convictee to some sort of anti-bias training program. And you may be thinking, oh, well, these are, hardened bigots, like what is going through some sort of training program, sensitivity training program really going to do? That was kind of actually my first reaction when I heard about this. But actually, it turns out that if you get some of these folks early, when they're young, when they maybe are just going around with a graffiti, a spray paint can instead of with a gun or a knife, and you run them through one of these programs and it's substantive, you can actually make a difference. And there are a lot of studies that these programs have dramatically lowered hate crime recidivism rates. And so I'm really excited that that passed on a bipartisan, overwhelming fashion. I'm looking forward to that becoming law, and I'm looking forward to Maryland continuing to take hate crimes, anti-Semitism, white supremacy really, really seriously, and having an absolute zero tolerance policy towards it. And then finally, I won't go through all my bills, but I just want to highlight one more, which is that an ethics bill. I'm a big fan of ethics laws. I'm a big believer in the whole sunlight is the best disinfectant maxim, though I guess we've learned over the course of the year that hand sanitizer is also a pretty good disinfectant. But the Integrity in High Office Act, which is HB 1058, passed unanimously in both chambers. It was really inspired, to be honest, by some of the allegations against Governor Hogan with his real estate dealings. He's been approving infrastructure projects near properties that he owns, and he's been making a pretty penny off of that. And that really kind of shone a light on a lot of inadequacies in our financial disclosure system and other transparency problems in our conflicts of interest laws. And so over the last year, I've really kind of put my green eye shade on, gone through our ethics laws with a fine-tooth comb, and HB 1058 is the product of that. And it makes a number of changes, basically just to ensure that our elected officials are acting in Maryland's interests rather than their own. And with that, I'm just going to pivot to E&T, Environment and Transportation, which also covers housing and also covers ethics. Those four issues are generally the four that I spend the most time on. On housing, this was a big session. As everyone knows, the pandemic really exacerbated pre-existing housing insecurity in the state. And in response, the General Assembly took a really important step of passing legislation, HB 18, that makes the state the first one in the country to grant tenants an access to legal counsel ability in eviction cases. So basically, if renters make 50% or less of the state median income, they'll be eligible for an attorney to help them argue defenses in eviction cases. This is key because basically 99% of landlords come to court with some sort of representation, as opposed to only about 1% of tenants. And this bill, assuming it becomes law, will basically bring more balance to legal proceedings, and to make sure that folks' rights are actually being completely voiced, and everyone's kind of getting a fair shake. Unfortunately, the General Assembly did not pass a companion bill that would have funded it. That bill died on the last day of session, but I'm hopeful that we'll secure funding for that program in a future session, and again become a national model for other states. A lot of other crucial housing legislation unfortunately failed in the last day or two. I'm happy to go into more detail in the Q&A portion of that. But I was relieved, as Senator Kramer said, that the state has received an enormous amount of rental assistance funding from the federal government and from the Biden administration. And I was honored that Speaker Jones appointed me to the work group responsible for administering Maryland's share of federal rental assistance funds. And my work group colleagues and I worked a lot over the session, and we persuaded the state's housing agency to make a number of changes to its program, both in the name of efficiency and in the name of equity. And so I'm looking forward to, we have almost $1 billion in rental assistance funds now, and so that's going to help a lot of people out. On the environment, I'll start with the good news. I'm glad that we passed the Zero Emission Bus Transition Act, which was SB 137. It'll transition the state's bus fleet to zero emission vehicles, which is obviously a huge step in curbing the carbon emissions of the state. We also passed the Transit Safety and Investment Act, which was HB 368, which is a huge cash infusion to help ensure our transit system is safe and reliable. It doesn't expand the system as much as I'd like to see. We'll have to save that for another session, but it does backfill a lot of money, basically a huge shortfall that we had, to make sure that repairs can actually happen. Because as folks hopefully get back to riding transit with the pandemic, slowly coming to a halt, it's important that all that reliability and all those boxes are checked. Unfortunately, as I'm sure a lot of y'all heard, the House and the Senate could not agree on a final version of the Climate Solutions Now Act, which was the big climate bill, before we adjourned. And I can talk more about the details of that in the Q&A, but I think the inability for the House and Senate to get on the same page really stemmed from the enormous size and complexity of the bill. And so I think going forward, we'll start to see more climate legislation shifting back to several bills tackling one topic each, rather than one large unwieldy omnibus bill. But the good news is that 3 elements of that bill were amended onto other bills. One will plant 5 million new trees, HB 991. One of them strengthens the Environmental Justice Commission, which is HB 1207. And then plus the aforementioned bill to hasten the transition to zero emission buses. So with that, I'll shut up, and I'll just conclude by saying I've rested for a month. I'm ready to go. I'm already looking ahead to my 2022 agenda, and I'm looking at stuff around, of course, housing and climate and water safety, but also things like pedestrian safety, income inequality, long-term care insurance. I'm also really interested in the loneliness epidemic that's been partially caused by COVID-19. So if you have any thoughts or ideas on those topics or any others, never hesitate to reach out to me. My email is vaughn.stewart@house.state.md.us. I'll post that in the chat. And then if you want my cell number, that's cool too. It's 301-804-8085. I'm one of those like cool, millennials who's pretty good at texting. So if that is your jam, don't hesitate to text me. But once again, it's an honor to serve you in Annapolis. It's an honor to work with the three of I would say the best. I was going to say 3 of the best, but I'd say the 3 best legislators in Annapolis, Senator Kramer, Delegate Crutchfield, and Delegate Cullison. And I'm happy to answer some questions.
At this point, I will take over, and I want to say thank you to Vaughn for giving me his cell phone number, because on those nights I'm at the restaurant and they serve me caffeinated rather than decaffeinated coffee, I know I have someone I can call 2-3 o'clock in the morning and just chat. I serve on the Finance Committee in the Senate, and one of the things that we worked on throughout the session was addressing issues of how to improve the unemployment system in our state. The unemployment division is an agency that the governor has strict oversight of. The legislature has very little to do with the unemployment division. The problem is that during this pandemic, we have had literally hundreds of thousands of our residents in need of accessing their unemployment benefits. And the system has been disastrous since out of the gate back in April a year ago. Every one of us, Senate, House members across the state, have been dealing with constituents in our districts who can't get their unemployment benefits. So we are on a daily basis trying to work with the Unemployment Insurance Division to get them those benefits. And the bottom line is, the issue rests at the feet of Governor Hogan. Now, sadly, prior to the pandemic, Governor Hogan's philosophy has been to slash government, slash employees in the state government, and the unemployment division has a fraction of the people working there as when Governor Hogan arrived. Suddenly we have this pandemic and they're overwhelmed. They were overwhelmed before the pandemic because of Governor Hogan's having slashed positions. And it's particularly sad because it's our federal dollars that pay for those positions. But he wanted to be able to brag about how much he has slashed government in his time in office. So out of the gate, we had these problems. He has denied these problems. He has repeatedly held press conferences stating that everything is working fine with the system when in fact it was collapsing. During the course of the pandemic, a $50 million new system that he contracted for was implemented and immediately crashed, and it crashed for days on end. So this past session in our finance committee, we did implement some new laws and regulations that will hopefully facilitate the ability of our residents to get their much needed unemployment benefits. But it has really been a tragedy that all of us have been dealing with on a daily basis. I speak to people in my district and say, I'll do everything I can to try to get you your benefits. I'll call over to the unemployment division now. But unfortunately, as hard as they're trying to do it, they've been limited and their hands have been tied by Governor Hogan's actions. One of the other things that we work on in the finance committee are energy issues. So I was pleased that this session, we passed a bill that was a real challenge getting it out of committee, but it was the community choice energy legislation that will allow our Montgomery County government officials, if they choose to do so, to implement this community choice energy so that they can sign an energy contract for every resident in the county doing two things: reducing the cost of energy because it'll be purchased on such a large scale, and ensuring that our energy sources are coming from green and renewable resources. So instead of being dependent on the fossil fuel industry to get our energy, Montgomery County can focus on getting us green energy and lead the way for the rest of the state so that we end our dependence on fossil fuels, which, if you're familiar with the work I've been doing in the legislature, I've been fighting this battle for years. The climate crisis is here. It is real. It is devastating our planet. It's devastating our state. And we need to start taking serious and definitive action. In that regard, I was pleased to sponsor a bill that passed that will require our Public Service Commission, which has authority over the public utilities in our state, that when the Public Service Commission now starts looking at approving new utility projects, they will have to take the climate crisis into consideration as part of that decision-making process so that they don't just go to fossil fuel-driven sources for the energy, without looking at the damage that will do to our environment and our health. On a personal level, I was also very pleased as Delegate Crutchfield had a bill that she had passed last year, have the governor's veto of it overridden. I had a bill that I worked on last year that would, which did, and it passed, create a division within the Attorney General's office dedicated to protecting our senior residents from financial exploitation, the fastest growing crime in our state. And that was an outgrowth of a bill that I passed a couple of years ago, which made our Attorney General the only one, the only AG in the entire nation that has the authority to step into the shoes of a financially exploited senior in our state and file civil suit on their behalf. And the reason for that is that we have so many seniors who, once their nest eggs are stolen, they don't have the resources to hire an attorney and go to court to try to get back their assets. This allows the Attorney General to do it on their behalf, and the entire recovery goes back to the exploited senior. It has been so overwhelmingly successful that the Attorney General came back to me and said, listen, we'd love to have an entire division in our office that would focus on those issues, but it needs to be created in state law and it needs to be funded by the state. And so we got that passed last year. For some reason, our veto-happy governor vetoed the bill at a time when certainly it's never been more important than to be protecting our seniors from exploitation, because during the pandemic, they have been overwhelmingly targeted by the con artists and the scammers. But my colleagues saw fit in both the House and the Senate to override the governor's ill-conceived veto, and now it's the law, and the division will start to go into effect. Real fast, I was also very pleased that a bill I've worked on for years passed this year that will increase opportunities for people to participate in the democratic process by creating a permanent absentee ballot voting act into Maryland law. So where we have states like Georgia and Florida, which are looking to restrict access to the polls, restrict the ability for people to cast a ballot, we just passed a bill that will allow our residents to sign up one time to vote by mail, absentee, and always receive their ballot in the mail to be able to vote by mail or put it in a ballot drop box. We learned the lesson during the pandemic in both the primary and the general, that given the opportunity to vote by mail, we have huge numbers of communities that historically have not turned out in large numbers to vote, particularly communities of color and our residents who have disabilities who don't readily have access to voting at the polls. The numbers were hit records for those people voting by mail, and now we'll have the opportunity to continue to do that in the future, and I'm very proud that we got that bill passed. I worked on issues that will expand community solar so that, again, we reduce our carbon footprint. I was proud that a number of bills that I worked on with regard to collective bargaining also passed. We have what are called floor leaders that take bills to the floor and answer questions and handle the debate when there's a debate on the floor of the Senate. I took all of the collective bargaining bills this year to the floor as the floor leader, and it made my Republican colleagues crazy because I would debate with them for hours on end these collective bargaining bills, and we got them voted on and we got them passed. And working families were well represented by our legislature this session. Finally, something that I try to work on routinely are animal welfare issues. If you know Ben Kramer, you know that I believe the way we treat animals reflects who we are as human beings. And I have worked very hard on those issues, and I was able to get what is now, if the governor doesn't veto it, will be a first in the nation bill to push back against the puppy mill industry. And it's work I've done in the past and I'll continue to work on in the future. And with that, I will wrap up by saying that, as my District 19 colleagues have indicated, we are a great team, that we work very well together. I'm very proud to work with them in Annapolis. There is no harder working legislative district in Annapolis than we are. And I'm pleased to say that the four of us, Delegates Cullison, Crutchfield, and Stewart, and I will be running as a team as we now enter the election season, which has begun. And we will be working together in our election season campaign, and look forward to continuing the good work that we do on behalf of the wonderful people of District 19. We are very appreciative of your supporting us, that you keep in touch with us. There isn't a session that goes by that we don't hear from the people in our district, because you all are so active, and we need to hear your voices. We need to hear your concerns, and thank you for sharing that with us. So with that, I will have some questions. There were a few that were sent to us ahead of time, and then I'll see if there are any questions in the chat room. The first question I have is, did the police reform bill as passed meet your expectations? And that was followed by this question: why did the Trust Act, despite being sponsored by the committee chair, not get a vote in the Senate Judicial Proceedings Committee? And I will let everybody chime in as they see fit in the delegation. I can quickly say that I was very proud of the work that we did on reimagining policing in our state. I give tremendous credit to the Judicial Proceedings Committee in the Senate and the House Judiciary Committee. They were tireless, working all last summer, fall, and into this legislative session. And they made historic changes to the way we will have law enforcement in the state. I can also quickly share with you, and again, I'm going to open it up to my colleagues to chime in. My understanding from the chair of the committee is that the Trust Act did not come out of the committee because evidently the votes were not on the Senate floor to get the bill passed. However, several pieces of it were amended on to the dignity not detention legislation that you heard Delegate Stewart talking about, that he sponsored. With that, would any of my colleagues like to jump in and respond to that question in any way?
Well, I would, just on the police accountability part of it. And that is just that I really would say ditto to what Senator Kramer mentioned, but most importantly, just to be a part of and to know that we have done something that is historic in this state is just, unbelievable. And again, I mean, I think this is something that, we can definitely say that as a state, we stood together, and we want to make sure police reform is what it should actually be. And I do believe that's what we did.
Yeah, and just if I could briefly, Senator Kramer, on the immigration piece. Well, first, I agree wholeheartedly with both of you. I mean, it's amazing what we pulled off on policing. I mean, we have the strongest police accountability legislation now in the country. And as Senator Kramer said, those that were involved with that on a day-to-day basis, including Delegate Crutchfield, really should be commended, because we did amazing. I say they did amazing work on that. Just briefly on the immigration front, Senator Kramer is 100% correct on that. Basically, elements of the Trust Act, including, for example, forbidding local law enforcement officers from asking about a resident's immigration status as part of a stop, not related to any investigation or whatever, just kind of like inquiring. That is now explicitly forbidden. That was an element of the Trust Act that was amended onto my bill, basically like in the last couple of days of session. But he's also correct, sadly, that it didn't appear that there was a veto-proof majority in favor of many of the other provisions of the Trust Act. And the reason I just wanted to reiterate that point is just how important it is, number one, that we keep some of these purple district senators reelected in 2022. I know that the urge in some of these these fall election cycles is to go to Virginia or go to Pennsylvania and try to help folks out there. But we could really use your help in terms of writing letters, making calls, knocking doors when that time comes to keep a lot of those senators on board. And secondly, it underscores something that I think my good friend Betsy Starks and maybe some other folks mentioned in the comment section, which is that we desperately need a Democratic governor, because we can be so much more productive if we did not have to worry about hitting a veto-proof threshold on every single bill. If that's off the table and we had some proactive progressive leadership from a Democratic governor, it would be a game changer. So that should be all of our focuses as well, behind, of course, reelecting your excellent District 19 team.
And I would echo what my colleagues have said and say that it's Democrats who can be proud of the enforcement changes, the police accountability and reform changes. And in terms of expectations, it actually went beyond my expectations in terms of what we could actually accomplish in one session. However, I would not presume that we are all the way there yet. And the system still needs to be reimagined in terms of how do we create a system that provides community support as well as protection. So I think we still have a little work to do, but I'm proud of what we accomplished.
All righty then, thank you all for that. I have a question that says, very disappointed that juvenile justice reform and merit for public defenders didn't pass in Senate. So I'm going to quickly, and then I can, if Delegate Crutchfield wants to jump in. I think we did do some very good work on the issue of juvenile justice reform, including passage of House Bill 1187, which was sponsored by Delegate Clippinger, who is the chair of the House Judiciary Committee. And so that bill, and it was entitled Juvenile Justice Reform. I know that Senator Carter's bill, which was the cross-file to this from the Senate, did not come back out of the House, but the House bill did get all the way across. So maybe that's why there's a little confusion there. And then real fast on the other issue, and then I'll see if Delegate Crutchfield has something she'd like to add to that. This issue of merit for public defenders, that was an issue that, if you're not familiar with it, the Public Defender's Office hires its employees at will. There was legislation that came into my committee, the Finance Committee, that would have given them status, these positions, status within the state personnel management system, so that they couldn't just be fired without there being a reason for it. The bill died on a very close vote in my committee. I voted in favor of the bill, but it died, I believe, by one vote in my committee. So that's the background on that one. Delegate Crutchfield, anything you would like to add on this question?
Yes, I would. I too was very, very disappointed. House Bill 1187 that left the House and was voted on by the House was not the same bill that came back to the House. And I was not, in fact, I was the only one that voted against it when it came back from the Senate, because it now was pretty much stripped down and did not provide a lot of the real elements of reform that we need in juvenile justice. It did not have, a jurisdiction age for children to be prosecuted in the juvenile system. It did not have a ban on home detention. It just did not have all those things which were in the original bill. So I too am disappointed and hoping that next session or future sessions that we are able to really do some true juvenile justice reform in this state.
Anyone else care to? All righty then. I see in the chat room, there is a question for Delegate Stewart. And the question reads, Delegate Stewart, can you speak to the likelihood of renewed foreclosure protection legislation for next session? You want to jump in on that?
Sure. So thank you, Scott. So Scott worked with me. I really appreciate, Scott, all your work and helping me with that bill this session. I put in a bill. There was a lot of renter legislation to help renters. And so I wanted to make sure there was at least one bill to help out homeowners who had been hit hard by the pandemic and who were struggling to pay their mortgages. I was particularly concerned, a number of issues, but particularly concerned that as basically a lot of these forbearance policies expire this spring because they last 12 months, there's a big fear that we're going to see another wave of foreclosures, maybe rivaling that of the Great Recession. And especially what's hard to see is that these post-forbearance agreements that some, not all, not most, but just sort of a problematic few of mortgage servicers and banks are offering homeowners are basically like these balloon payments, where if you don't pay your mortgage back from an entire year very quickly, then they foreclose on you within a matter of months. And so I had legislation that was pretty far-reaching that touched on the various aspects of that, and unfortunately met a unceremonious end in the Economic Matters Committee, which is a tough committee for that sort of legislation and to take on some of the corporate interests. In terms of prospects for next year, I mean, I would absolutely, Scott, we can talk offline, but I'd absolutely be interested in doing anything more to help homeowners facing foreclosure, whether it's due to the pandemic or not. Obviously, hopefully, the urgency around this issue will be a little bit lessened next session. But yeah, I mean, absolutely, I want to work on this issue. I want to continue to work on this issue. And we need to strategize about how we get around the problems we faced this session, which was a lot of opposition from both parties on that House committee.
Thank you for that. All right, at this point, I know that the Leisure World Democratic Club needs to hold their vote for their officers. So I am going to say thank you to everybody who joined us this evening. We very much appreciate your taking the time and the effort and the energy to meet with us via Zoom and to give us an opportunity to learn what you're thinking and to share with you the work that we're doing in Annapolis. Again, my thanks to Delegates Cullison, Crutchfield, and Stewart for all their hard work in the legislature. They're great teammates. And my thanks again to the Democratic Central Committee for putting this event together, hosting the town hall, and my thanks to the Leisure World Democratic Club and the District 19 Democratic Club. And folks, please don't hesitate. If there's anything you want to discuss with any of us, we are all easily accessed and very much open and willing to talk and hear what you have to say. With that, everybody stay healthy and well, and thank you. And I'll be leaving now, so Leisure World Democratic Club can do their thing.
Thank you, Senator. And thank all four of you. What a forward-leaning, progressive, united delegation we have. Really dynamic. You all are the best. I'm really glad that I live where I do. Thank you for all your, and you pay attention to any call, any email. We get responses immediately from all of you. So thank you. I really appreciate it. And if the Democratic Club members will stay on for a few minutes, we'll do our elections and say goodbye to everybody else.
want to add one thing, if you don't mind, before I get off. D19 Club next meeting is going to be May 26th. I'm going to send the Zoom link out tomorrow or this weekend. And one thing I forgot to mention earlier is precinct chairs. If you're interested in being a precinct chair, please contact me. My email is in the chat. And Leisure World, for the most part, is fine when it comes to precinct chairs. But if you live, especially down county, or not down county, down district, well, the down county parts of the district, you know what I'm trying to say. There's a lot of vacancies down there, and we could really use all the help we can get, especially since it looks like the pandemic's gonna be over by the time next election comes. So we're definitely gonna refocus our priorities onto getting those precinct chairs. So that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you,
so-
Stephen.
Thank you, Roger.
Hey, and thank all the D19 folks who are on. We really appreciate it. And if the Democratic Club folks will stay on, I don't actually chair the next part of this meeting because it's the elections and our bylaws prohibit me from chairing my own election. In their wisdom, they prohibit that. But we do have the chair of our Nominations and Elections Committee, Barbara Levin. And by the way, she's not just chair of the Nominations and Elections Committee, she also chairs our Legislative Advocacy Committee. And we had a lot of exchanges with the D19 delegation. And as I said, they were all very responsive. So I would like to turn it over to Barbara Levin, if she can unmute herself and take over.
I just unmuted. Thank you, Roger. And I want to thank our senator and delegates because they've been a pleasure to work with. And anytime anybody in the advocacy committee has contacted them, they're just right there. They're so receptive to our community. It's wonderful. So we really thank them all. Okay. Now I'm putting on my other hat. Good evening. It's my pleasure to introduce the slate of officers for the Executive Committee for the Democratic Club of Leisure World. But before I introduce that, I'd like to introduce you to the committee, the nominee, okay? First of all, as you know, I'm Barbara Levin, okay? The rest of the committee was Joe Cook, Pat Duran, Rosie Eggman, and Sandy Robinson. They were absolutely fantastic. I want to thank them. They were a pleasure to work with. It was really very exciting. The committee nominated the following officers for the 21-23 term. Excuse me. And if we were in a room where I could ask them to stand up when their names are called, I would. But since I can't, just pretend they're standing. Okay, for president, we nominate Roger Blackwell. For first vice president, Sandy Zimmett. For second vice president, Judy Frumpkin. For secretary, Jane Green. For treasurer, Jane Corona. And the members at large, we have Paul Bessel, Arthur Blair, and Pat O'Malley. Normally, I would ask at this time for nominations from the floor, but the committee, I just wanted to say, the committee is advertised for 2 months in both the Leisure World News and the Donkey Dispatch, asking if anyone was interested in serving on the board, with absolutely no replies. Okay, I don't know if that was due to the pandemic and people were thinking of other things, or it was because we had such an excellent board that served us so well and did such a great job and really brought our club to life. We were just so active and did so many things. It was magnificent. So I'm going to say it was the latter, not the former. So I'd like to, if I could I have Barbara Cronin come on?
Yep. Hello, Barbara Levin. I would like to move that we elect the slate by acclamation.
Okay. And I'm not sure how we do this on Zoom, but I guess I'd like to ask for all these yays or nays. So
Barbara, I've asked everyone to unmute so they can yay or nay.
oh, thank you.
There's also a hand raising feature.
Right. Okay. So if you could either say yay or raise your hand.
Yay.
If you're-
Yay.
Yay. Thank you.
Yay.
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 Nay. Hear any nay? Hearing none, we now have a new slate of officers. I want to thank you all. You've all been so cooperative. We will be swearing them in. If that's what we do we swear in? We will be installing them, I'm sorry, at our June 3rd meeting. So you all will attend our June 3rd meeting. I really much appreciate everybody's willingness and help, and it's been a pleasure, absolute pleasure to serve you.
Congratulations.
And congratulations.
Thank you.
It is a
Thank you,
wonderful.
Barbara. Congratulations.
Yeah,
Yeah, we appreciate.
Thank you, Barbara.
And thank you, Barbara. You've been wonderful in
committing.
every respect. in adding to this club. Yes, you've been a real asset.
I think, Michael, you can now turn off everybody's, you can mute them and we can turn it back to Roger.
You mean I can't make a speech?
Yeah.
Turn them off.
I am not making a
Or
speech.
Speech.
You can
Speech,
speak.
Roger.
All I want to do, I will reiterate what Sandy Zimmett just said. Thank you, Barbara Levin, and thank you to the committee, and thank you to Barbara Cronin for for nominating us. And remember, it's time to pay dues for
Mr. President,
2022.
may I address that?
Yes, Jane Corona.
I'm always ready to take your money. This is what the treasurer does.
We want to see her.
The new membership, about a couple of hundred of you have renewed your memberships for the upcoming membership year from June 1st, 2021 through May 31st, 2022. But if anybody hasn't, or if you're not sure what your membership status is, you can call me at 301-598-2131 or email me at jane.e.corona, C-A-R-O-N-A, I had nothing to do with the virus, at gmail.com. And I can tell you what your membership status is. You can send me a check for the $15 payable to DCLW. Thank you. Or you can call me with credit card information, and we can take care of it a lot quicker over the phone with the credit card. And that way I can copy down your information and not have to worry about my reader who comes once a week to try to read your email addresses, which sometimes can be a challenge. So if I write it down in little Braille dots, then I can read it. So if anybody would like to join their, renew their membership, now's the time to do that. And I'll be happy to talk with any of you to do that.
All right.
Thanks.
Thank you, Jane. I thought you were going to say Corona, but not in the sense of the beer.
Oh, no, well, I don't care about the beer anymore, but I just don't want to be anything to do with the virus. My brother has gotten hate mail because our name is Corona, but it's not spelled that way.
Yeah.
So ridiculous.
Roger,
Yes,
It's Barbara. I want to thank Michael from the Democratic Central Committee for making this possible and to make our election so
Easy.
simple, and we didn't have to go through a lot of expense. So Michael, thank you so much.
Thank you, Barbara. Happy to help.
He
Thank you.
is spectacular,
wonderful.
isn't he?
Yeah.
Uh,
And you know, in June, we have Pulitzer Prize winner Hedrick Smith coming to speak to us via
Oh,
Zoom.
wow. Oh,
And
nice.
so we hope you all will join us. I'm wondering, does anybody else on the board, Sandy, Arthur, Paul, anybody, Pat, say anything?
Well, I want to say something. We're gonna,
There's-
oh, is Pat speaking? Let Pat speak first.
I'm not speaking.
You can talk, because what I'm gonna say involves you. And
No, I didn't say anything. Go ahead.
we're gonna start up our Winning Wednesdays. We're gonna fight voter suppression. We are gonna do more postcards and letters, and Pat and Judy Frumkin are my my cohorts, or my in crime, whatever. So we'll see how that goes, because there's a lot more to be done. And we've got to keep all those seats in Congress and the state legislatures that we can, and get more. We need to elect more Democrats so that we can do what we want to do. We can pass HR1. Well, we passed HR1. We can pass S1 that's in the Senate. And that's going to be our focus of the next batch of postcards that we're going to write. Plus, Roger will put everything in the Donkey Dispatch. And we've had such a wonderful club, and we've had so many active people. And Lois Jordan and Justine Johnson, and I'm trying to read down the list, because everybody has been so great in participating and helping this effort. And all I can say is thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Welcome. Thank you.
By the way, I did listen in very closely to what our delegation said. We are planning to do something in Virginia. We may do something in Pennsylvania. We do not plan to forget our own District 19 delegation.
Yeah, I heard that too.
Yep. Okay. With that, I am going to once again thank Michael Tardif, who is exemplary. And it's kiss everybody good night time. Mwah.
Good night, everyone.
Take
care.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.